In just a few days' time, we're going to be starting in October, and that traditionally, for those of you who are writing and have that connection with what has often been called Nanowrimo, or National Novel Writing Month, for the month of November, October has always been seen as its sister month and is called Preptober, so that you are preparing, you're getting ready, you're bringing your ideas together, you're crafting a draft or working on an existing manuscript and thinking, how might you get this in the situation, or how might you prepare it so that in November you can be busy and active every day of the month to achieve a big target. Nanowrimo as an organization is a charitable trust based in the States, and hundreds of thousands of people, myself included, have benefited enormously over the years from the brilliant work that they have put together. Just like so many good things, the principle of Nanowrimo as a month in which would-be writers and aspiring writers can set time aside to work on that manuscript, to grab a pencil and start writing, start scribbling away. It came from something very innocent, something very aspirational, and a bunch of friends got together at night after work every day for a month to see if any of them could write a novel. A few of them managed a very rough draft. Think about it, they were writing for hours every night after long days at work, and so sometimes their output could have been questionable, certainly very varied, and most of them didn't finish the challenge, but many of them, by extending the new habit of writing every day, created great results over the second or the third month. So the idea, as an innocent idea, of National Novel Writing Month gained momentum, it gained enormous popularity, and span out into a charitable organization that has been of benefit to hundreds of thousands of people. Whether they've all completed a book in a month, I would argue, doesn't matter. My perspective is that if they are in a better position after that month than they were when they commenced that first 30 days or 31 days of actually writing, that has been a bonus. In the last year, there's been some controversy about some of the ways that some of the groups within the program have been administered, or perhaps poorly administered, with issues around safeguarding in a few instances, but in too many instances, one is too many. And then a few weeks ago, there was a huge backlash when the charitable organization said, oh, we will now use AI, or we will allow somebody who's written a 50,000 word manuscript using AI to be seen as in an equal position, or to be as equally accepted by us as a creative human being sitting down at their desk, tapping away at one of their devices and working, slogging away at creating a 50,000 word manuscript. If that's your goal, by the way, if your goal is 30,000, it's completely okay, it's absolutely fine. What the idea is that you start somewhere and you take that manuscript through to completion and you actually finish a process. Where Nanowrimo got into massive trouble, and you can look on their website, nanowrimo.org, where Nanowrimo got into trouble this month is in issuing a statement that said all writers are equal, and then amending their statements because of the huge torrent of reaction against their comments on what is acceptable policy using generative AI. Generative AI, for example, is what I've used recently on a book about being a private landlord. I had 4 hours in a coffee shop and I generated, I can't remember what the figure was, 15,000 words or whatever, digitally in a few hours. But I then spent 35 hours handwriting all my amendments, putting it through checks to prove that there were no plagiarism issues, that the grammar is good, and then going through it again a third time. So I've done a plagiarism test, I've done a grammar test, so I used a piece of software called plagiarism.ai and a piece of software called Grammarly, which you've all heard of. Neither of those are generative AI. And then I've taken years of experience, I've taken lots of my diaries, I've looked at lots of my tenant records, and all the sorts of things that are in my notebooks, and dozens of these. And I created case studies and a structure for the book. The content is pure Nick Sturgeon and his experience of being a landlord since leaving university. Being a spare room landlord for the vast majority of the last 40 years. Using that experience, I've created a book. How does a public argument from Nanowrimo, based around the inappropriate language they've used and which has turned off thousands of authors, talking about giving the same perspective or the same accolades as writer to somebody using generative AI and creating something presumably they mean with effort, and somebody using their own brain and ideas and blood, sweat and tears to create a book in a different way, i.e. from their own pure efforts? Those aren't equal, they are different approaches. One, the generative AI has validity, and I'm never going to say that's not what I believe. It is what I believe. But how you then work with something that you've generated from a piece of software that gives you ideas and prompts, you've got to make that book your own. You've got to create it in your own voice, in your own creative DNA, basically, so that the fast generation of ideas is replaced completely with your perspective on what is now an original book, because of the total overwrite that you give to what has been basically a really good skeleton. I wouldn't imagine I could do a full book with AI, although I have watched and enjoyed some really good YouTube channels about the use of generative AI to create a very good deep outline before you then are all over it with your pen and you basically rewrite it. But you have had a huge impetus and a push. Because Nanowrimo has sponsorship from Pro Writing Aid, and I've used Pro Writing Aid, only a demo model, but I've used it and tested it for 30 days, and I found it quite helpful. I haven't used it since. I used it after I went to the London Writers' Conference back in the spring, and it was really good to talk to some of their people and see the value of what they're offering. Generative AI is very different from the non-generative AI, which we all use when we use a Word document and it underlines text that is out of context or grammar that is incorrect or basic spelling errors that we make in our documents. We all use that and we don't question it and we don't rebel or get angry with the companies that provide that, as we expect, in our devices. But I think Nanowrimo has tarnished itself by the way it has handled what could have been a debate. They've just said, we'll go with stop, edit, delete paragraph. I think Nanowrimo has definitely tarnished itself, shot itself in the foot, metaphorically, by saying, okay, we're sponsored by Pro Writing Aid, we will therefore say that generative AI is just as acceptable to us as a human being working hard, slaving away at their desk. That was wrong, that was pointless. And then they've come back with other explanations of why it's appropriate to say, yes, you should use this if you have some form of difficulty or life circumstance that is holding back your creative process. That was a foolish statement, and it's made a lot of people very angry. I don't think I'm remotely angry about it. I can see both points of view, but I think we have to cut through the shouting. I think we have to draw a line in the sand and say, no, I'm not going to use generative AI, or I'm going to use generative AI. When I got back from the office tonight, I made myself a cup of tea and I sat and watched a really interesting video about the use of ChatGPT if you're stuck with ideas for a book, for a YouTube video, for titles, for medium.com article creation. It was just to say, look, I've got some ideas. These are my key areas of activity. This is what I'm interested in. And these are topics I'd be willing and happy to write about. Please generate 20 article titles. Or please give me 500-word synopses that I could use to write a new book or develop some story ideas. Nothing wrong with that, and you can use it intelligently. But for the organization that is there for writers, nanowrimo.org, they were out of order to make the assessment that both approaches are equal, because they're not. I've referenced books that I've written before and used NaNoWriMo. This is the best one, 10-minute budget, and that's a book written on my AlphaSmart Neo. I didn't know anything about generative AI at that point. I typed it out word by word using all the files on my AlphaSmart. It's one of my favorite books. It's certainly emotionally a book that I think that people need to read when they say they cannot manage their money. 10-minute budget, I think it's a great book. But of course I do, because I'm the author. I'm bound to say that. We have to find our own ways. We have to create our own luck. I am very much throwing myself into Preptober, and I'm still going to call it Preptober because it's what we're familiar with. It's a phrase that does what it says on the tin. You're preparing in October for the project that is important to you. National Novel Writing Month, November, maybe I don't want to use that title, but we could call it Book in a Month, we could call it Project in a Month, we could call it Manuscript in a Month. In fact, I like that one of the three. That's the one. Manuscript in a month. Why don't you take that on board? Why don't you consider joining me? Because I think I'm going to create some new videos next week as we step into October about how we prep, how we work through it together, you and I, each other, on our own manuscripts, and the ways we have a Zoom call or some form of live, maybe a conversation on YouTube about what we do, how we do it, the way we want to structure and plan our writing, and how we will become accountable. Those will be four very useful things to work out next week as we step across the calendar boundary into October, and we see ourselves moving for being ready for the goal of regular writing in November. By the way, you can write your manuscript any month you want. It doesn't have to be a month, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 3 months, it doesn't matter. But what we have to do is create our own luck and be busy. And I'm suggesting that I could be helpful as a resource for those of you who are nervous about having your first ever manuscript in a month process. Are you getting ready for October to prepare some writing work? Are you in a place at work where you could really do with some help, in which case ask for support? Are you in a place where the idea of writing a manuscript in a month as we move into November, only 5 weeks away, as we move into November, gives you that sense of, oh yes, I want to create something. I want to grab my notebook, or I want to grab that keyboard and create something which will help me to produce a written project. It could be a book of poems, it could be a collection of short stories, it could be a novella. It doesn't matter to me at all what your project is. If there's anything I can share here or in a response to one of your comments talking about something perhaps more than likely about your writing output or your prose, the work that you want to do around a manuscript or a written idea, of course, if there's something I can help you with, I'll be happy to do that. Wherever you are, whatever you're working on, you know what I'm going to say. Happy writing.